Hello everyone, welcome to Lokmaanya. Every year, September is when colleges and universities begin their academic year in many countries across the world. As more and more students travel abroad for their education, this academic year is no longer just academic but more of a life changing experience. This year, however, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, students have been unable to fly abroad. In fact, a report from QS University Rankings has found out that 61% students this year have decided to postpone their studies abroad by a year. Now, many universities have already started online classes, but can they make up for the on campus and foreign experience? To discuss this, we have with us today Jacob Zucker and Mark Kinra. Jacob is from the US and Mark is from India, and both have pursued a master's in security studies at Tel Aviv University in Israel. Jacob and Mark, welcome to Lokmaanya.
Thank you.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, pleasure to be
Hi.
here.
First up, can you both give us a quick introduction of yourselves and why you decided to go for this course and that too at Tel Aviv University? Mark, would you go first?
So basically about my introduction, my name is Mark Kinra and I'm a corporate lawyer by profession. Been in corporate law almost for around 7+ years. But on the side, I do have a lot of passion for geopolitics, which actually I pursued simultaneously while I was doing my law. And when I was almost done with my law degree, I thought I really want to get into the career of geopolitics. Generally, I'll go with a bit of backdrop. Mostly people who get into the course of international relations or geopolitics, they generally go to US, UK, and other European countries, or even in India. But I wanted my experience to be a bit different. I also wanted a bit of practical experience and something which is real life. So I was looking to various courses, and then I stumbled upon the course of Tel Aviv University, and they were providing various courses in international relations, from negotiation, conflict resolution to security and diplomacy, which was my course, and that course was taught in English. So that was one thing which I was absolutely appalled that okay, fine, it's like an English course, and it will be very easy for me, at least the education part of it. There's a lot of Israelis speak English, and actually Israeli culture, like there are a lot of people who are coming from various parts of the world. And also, one thing which really intrigued me to get towards the course were two things primarily. Firstly, being in Israel, and I can understand about Middle East more from viewpoint of Israel, and also a bit about from the viewpoint of the Arab world. So that was interesting, and moreover, because it's very realistic. The course, dwells into various curricular activities where you go to the borders and everything. You study yourself, you look into yourself, so you learn more. So which I don't think was I could have done in US, because there were no practical situations over there, or UK.
Right. Yeah.
And second, Tel Aviv University had really good rankings worldwide. So when I'm passing out of the university rankings makes an important presentation over the world that okay, you passed out from a good university. So that makes it more.
Right. Jacob?
So I'll answer your question also by way of a brief introduction. So my name is Jacob Zucker. I was born and grew up in Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. And ever since I was a kid, I've had an interest in sort of Middle Eastern / Islamic world affairs, in addition to counterterrorism. And I did my undergraduate studies at Princeton University in the US in Middle Eastern Studies and Arabic. And that included a 6-month stint in Morocco for study abroad. And I sort of graduated college with a very, very deep interest in geopolitical affairs / international relations and security issues for the global community. And directly after graduating college, I immigrated to Israel through a process called Aliyah. It's basically an immigration pathway for people of Jewish religious descent. And I did 2 years as an infantryman in the paratrooper brigade. And once I released from the army, I was looking to continue my academic studies. And I was living in Tel Aviv at the time, a recently released soldier. And the security and diplomacy program at Tel Aviv University was in many ways the perfect fit. For one, I think the international program was a very interesting asset because in Israel, a lot of the universities have Hebrew language courses and English language courses.
Yeah.
And as I speak both Hebrew and English, but I ultimately opted for the English course because I thought it would be important to have the diversity of opinions. You know, we had people like myself from the US, we had people like Mark from India, there were people from Europe, from China, from Latin America, from Africa. And I think the diversity of the student body really added a lot to the overall program. Sort of another reason why I wanted to pursue my secondary studies in Israel is that Israel, like India and like the US, has a very, very clear consciousness of its geopolitical location in the world, its geography, and also the strategic considerations that come from that. And in my studies in the US and living in Washington, D.C., I've sort of grown up under the shadow of American strategy and American geopolitical interests. And obviously, this sort of tends, you know, there are pluses and minuses, but to a more American-centric interpretation of history and also current events. And I thought being in Israel, which in one way has a lot of shared interests with the US, but is a small country in the Middle East with a very, very different set of challenges it's facing, would give me a different perspective on both Middle Eastern affairs and broader geopolitical affairs the world over. So those are two of the big reasons why I personally decided to pursue my master's at Tel Aviv University.
Okay, that sounds good. So what are some unique academic and campus experiences you guys have had at Tel Aviv University? Jacob, you can go again.
So I had a kind of interesting year because I basically was able to complete first semester on campus, and then starting second semester, the coronavirus pandemic began, and we were on Zoom for basically the second half of the year. But one thing that I think was really valuable that Mark actually touched on were field trips that the program organized to Israel's borders. So we had a trip to the Gaza border, we had one to the Lebanese border, to the Golan Heights, and to Jerusalem, which is a somewhat contested territorial area. And it was very surreal for me because, you know, some of the other students, it was their first time in Israel, they'd only been there for a month or two, so it was very interesting for them seeing into enemy territory, you know, standing on the border and looking into Gaza. But for me, I spent the past 2 years of my army service patrolling those fences. So it was very surreal returning instead of a military vest on my back, but with a backpack and a pencil in my hand. And I think this sort of surrealness, or this going from the field to the field as a soldier and then an academic, is something that's unique about Israel. Because especially in the research world and the academic world in Israel, there's a very, very tight nexus between the military establishment, the security establishment, and academia. And I think those field trips and the way that Tel Aviv University organized that aspect of the curriculum was very interesting and very helpful, both for myself, who is more of a naturalized Israeli, as well as, you know, purely study abroad students.
Mark?
You know, I think Jacob highlighted that field trip was one of the most, you know, magnificent part of the whole curriculum. And of course, the professors there, you know, their understanding of the worldview is completely different. So the professors which I studied around in 2012, there were a lot of professors, you know, from European background and Israeli background. It was a mixed kind of class, and their understandings, their teachings. So one class which I particularly liked was that of the history, because I like history in particular. So Middle East history class was my favorite one, and you know, it really told me, because generally my understanding of the land and the culture comes from the history. So when I, you know, read history, it's like, you know, picture moving, and, you know, I can understand, I can feel it. So that was really, yeah, that was really beautiful. Then field trips, and there were also ambassadors forum where various ambassadors used to come upon, and, you know, as a chief guest, as guest lecturers. So that was again interesting, which I really find, you know, something which I can learn upon.
Wonderful. This question is again for both of you. Like, studying in Israel for a year, and Jacob, you have been there a bit longer, but how has this experience shaped your understanding of Israel as a country? Mark, we'll go with you first.
Sure. So as an Indian, again, as any Indian, I'm also fascinated with Israel with all these stories coming about. And India has some fascination with
Yeah,
Israel, which I don't know why, but there is. So
there is.
yeah, so being there, living there, understanding things, it's really nice. So it's not just the people, the culture, also the food. And the best
Uh-huh.
part about it was, the food was very good. And actually, I, being a vegetarian, I had a lot of vegetarian options. I never had an
Wonderful.
issue with vegetarian food. And and the food was also very nice. And
Awesome.
and even I got a bangan ka bharta over there, packed bangan ka bharta, and various varieties
Really?
actually. Yeah.
Really?
So yeah, really. So that was really fun part about it. That I can go to the store, buy bangan ka bharta, and have it. So just
Mm-hmm.
for Jacob's understanding, bangan is eggplant. If you get a lot of eggplant salads and food in your stores in Israel, you must have stumbled upon some. So
Yeah,
that I was
we
talking
plant
about.
the steak of the vegetable world in Israel.
Yes, and also the kind of Indian world as well. People know you had a lot of eggplant over here, so that was a fun part about it. And
Mm-hmm.
the people, why we do it, culture wise, we are very different.
Yeah.
You find some similarities, but again, it's very different world. India is in a
Mm-hmm.
different time zone. Israel in a different time. But still,
Yeah.
there are similarities which you feel it and you can go ahead. And it's just the experience that matters for me.
Right, right. Jacob, how has your experience shaped your understanding of Israel?
So for me, it's a little bit different than Mark, obviously because I'm a dual citizen, both Israeli and American. But I spent my entire childhood and the first 22 years of my life in the U.S. And as someone that grew up in an American Jewish community, there's something of a, I don't want to say stereotype, but predilection to look at Israel as the little sister of the U.S., where you see most of Israel's interests and future is intimately tied to those of the U.S., particularly when it comes to the Middle East. Okay, we see
Yeah.
Israel's interests and Israel's ambitions in the Middle East sphere as an extension of America's interests. And
Yeah.
coming to Israel, especially after 2 years in the army, to sort of see the security network from the inside, to go into academia in such a setting, it really sort of helped me break the American-centric way of looking at both Israeli foreign policy and defense policy, but also regional dynamics. And it showed me that there is a lot of overlap between American and Israeli agendas, but it's not necessarily coextensive all the time. And Israel is informed by a very different set of motivations and history and social and cultural factors that push it to make decisions that are simply absent in the US, and things I never considered in terms of foreign policy, defense policy, domestic policy growing up in the States. But on the other hand, on sort of the lighter answer, it was also a very different experience and culturally for me as well. The
Mm-hmm.
academic culture in America is very different than the academic culture in Israel. In Israel, sort of one of the cultural stereotypes of us is that when people talk, when they have a group discussion, everyone shouts and everyone talks at the same time, and everyone interrupts everyone else, and that's just how it is. And it was funny because you had some students from America who are used to, raising their hands and being called on and speaking in turn and always sort of deferring to the lecturer. Where in Israel, it's much more of a democratic process. As long as you're loud and assertive, you can interrupt the conversation at any point. So
Oh.
it was both amusing and also interesting to see how Israeli culture figured into academia as well. And like Mark said, of course, the food is something that you can't deny. So it's a huge asset. So those are some
You
ways that.
you guys should share some food pictures and recipes with me once this interview is over because I'm really interested to know how it is. So,
Sure,
um,
sure. I actually I picked up hummus from Israel, and ever
huh,
since I've been eating. I mean, we've been
okay.
eating hummus ever since that.
I love
So
hummus. It's
yeah,
amazing.
it's healthy. And actually it's very Indian also.
Moving on to our next question. Both of you have traveled a lot. Jacob, you have explored Central and South Asia, and Mark, you have traveled all across Europe. How has this experience contributed to your education? Jacob, would you go first?
Yeah, so A very, very formative experience in my educational path, but also my personal development, was the summer after my second year of college. I had an internship in Pokhara, Nepal, where I was
Oh,
working for a think tank that was doing agricultural and ecological research. But it was sort of my first exposure to South Asia. And I was in Nepal for about 8 weeks, and I visited some places in UP in northern India for 2 weeks on the end. And it was one of those click moments where you just feel addicted. And as soon as I got on the flight home, I said, I'm coming back the first opportunity I get. And since then, I was able to basically go back to India, Nepal once more in college. And when I graduated, a friend of mine from Princeton, we took a month and did 4 countries in Central Asia. We went to Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. And that was a very, very interesting and unique experience because for me, it was the first time that I've been in a country that was a former Soviet republic.
mm,
I suppose I underestimated the influence of Russian culture on Central Asia and how it's influenced not only their modern history, but also everything from economics to social values to demography. You see the impact of the Soviet Union on that area. So the month-long trip that I did sort of between college graduation and moving to Israel was very formative. And it definitely helped direct my attention towards sort of Iran, Central Asia, East Asian sphere, as opposed to more Israel-centric Middle East. And then, like all Israelis, once I got out of the army, I took an 8-month trip sort of between my release and before I started studies. And I took a month-long or 8-month-long trip from Sri Lanka to Nepal. I was about
mm,
1 month in Sri Lanka, 3 months in India, and about 4 months in Nepal at the end.
mm.
And again, that was an incredibly formative trip. I went from all the way from the bottom of Tamil Nadu up to Jammu and to Himachal Pradesh, and then over into Nepal. So obviously, 4 months in India is not nearly enough time to. It's a huge country. It's an entire continent.
It
But
is.
after that, moving into my master's and now into my professional career, I definitely have a focus on Central Asia / South Asia, and I think a large part of that is due to my personal experiences traveling across the region.
Wonderful. Mark, what did Europe mean to you? What was your experience?
Um, uh, Actually, mine was more of a personal, understanding trip, like, understanding myself and about what's happening all around. So, after my first sem, actually, I got that opportunity where we had around 20 to 25 days break uh, due to holiday. So I thought, it's a good opportunity. I should travel. So I traveled
Mm-hmm.
in Israel also from south to north,
Oh,
and but Israel is demographically it's a small country, so it's easy and it's faster. So that I small trips I did when I was in Israel. I went to Europe for about 20-25 days trip, and it was
mm-hmm.
really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the best part about the trip was not I was just crossing borders. I was hopping borders, and I was going to a different country, but within a fraction of time. So it was kind of like, I'm in one big country, consider like it's in India, and we're traveling. It's like, states of India. We're traveling from one state to another state, and
Yeah.
it was that kind of feeling. It was so easy. So that is that thing where we don't have in South Asia till now,
Yes.
which I think we should have it. Possibly down the line, whenever we are in a good situations, the geopolitical situations really got good, then I really think that we should have that kind of atmosphere where if I want to travel, I can travel from India. And actually, I live very much near the Pakistan border. Pakistan border is much nearer than going to south of India to me. So
Right,
I
right.
can within half a day I can go to Pakistan. So if I want, I can travel to Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. It's very much accessible. But because of these tensions, we are not able to do that.
True.
But possibly in 50 years or 100 years, when things really go good, my hope is that we should be doing something like Europe, because
Of
that is
course.
when we will be actually, considered as a developed nation, as a developed, ingenuity. Then we'll be having it, because then everybody is same, and that will be the
Mm-hmm.
beauty of it. It's like old days, pre partition days. I
Yeah.
think that we should enjoy it.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, when you say 50 years, 100 years, whenever it is possible, if it happens in our lifetime, it's great. But someday.
I will really, I'll take my
Yeah,
car and
same
I will
here.
drive down.
Same here, same here. So let's come to our last question. Thanks to the pandemic, most of the learning this year has shifted to digital. And do you think online classes can make up for this education and experiences which both of you have had, studying in a different country at a different university? And do you think online learning can deliver that? Why or why not? Mark, let's begin with you.
So, online learning is a very good medium to learn. Particularly, I'm talking from a professional sense as well. I'm a law grad. I need to update myself as and when. So I really got into the computer to do a particular course, get myself updated, which is very nice. And and online learning is good for small duration of courses, a month course, 2 month course, 6 months course.
Uh-huh.
It's really good. And it's actually good because a person, is a professional. He can learn, he can work accordingly without wasting too much time, getting into the full time college degree or something. But it cannot replace the college medium. It cannot replace the on ground medium, because it's on ground medium which is your base, and that will always
Right.
be there. So online medium can be good for small contributions to yourself, to your personal growth. But as a base, I think it's really important that you should have a full blown college degree where you go interact, because if you don't interact, you cannot develop as a person. How will you know others' point of view? You're just
Of
reading books,
course.
which you can do otherwise as well.
Yeah.
So I think as a base, one should really have this thing. But online is good medium, but I'm not for the long duration.
Right. Jacob, what are your thoughts?
So I'm gonna, preface this answer by saying I had 4 years of on-campus learning in an American university, and that was sort of my base. And now I did a half a year on Zoom, and obviously, I think I prefer in-person learning, especially in undergraduate. It was more of a seminar setting. I came from a very small degree, so my last 2 years of college, almost all of my classes were a group of no more than 10 people sitting around a table and discussing readings. And that sort of intimate dialogue, that sort of Socratic method of learning, is very, very hard to emulate online. We can try, and I think Zoom is a very interesting platform and is it's a first step in the direction of this. But in terms of where technology stands right now, having a truly immersive sort of dialogue experience is very, very hard to do online. But what are the pluses? Okay, I was in an international program right now during the middle of a pandemic. We were able to, we had people from something like 20, 30 different countries represented.
Yeah.
And, notwithstanding all the drama, everything that was happening in the world, we finished the degree, we finished the program.
Wonderful.
So I think Zoom and online learning is incredible in basically bringing people together. There's a lot of talk about now, are we looking at the end of globalization, or after the pandemic, is the world moving towards a more closed system? And I think this video interview discussion we're having right now is a counterfactual. Is that with Zoom, with online technology, you can have someone in Pune, someone in Jodhpur, and someone in Tel Aviv having a conversation in real time. That's incredible. Obviously, the intimacy, though, of a sort of in-classroom experience is impossible. But like everything, there's benefits and disadvantages. And I think as we move forward, particularly if there's not a vaccine that emerges, in the next, let's say, couple months, people will continue to innovate and continue to improve the quality of online platforms to hopefully get closer to emulating sort of a virtual reality experience of what the classroom truly feels like. But again, I'm old-fashioned. I like to have a real book of paper falling apart in my hands. I like to sit across from a table and look at someone in the eye when I'm lecturing or arguing with them. That's more personal preference. So I think overall, it's truly incredible that we were able to continue in the capacity we did. Obviously, it wasn't ideal, but that's where innovation comes in. That's where adaptation comes in, and they call Israel the innovation capital of the world. So I'm sure someone smarter than me will find a way to make this happen. But waiting for that meanwhile.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Mark, for your wonderful insights. This interview, more than anything, has told me that you guys have a lot of interesting stories to tell about your years in Israel, about your travels, about the way you look at the world, especially Middle East, South Asia, Israel. And if we would, I wish we had more time. We would have done so much more, covered so many more stories. But we'll have to stop here now. Thank you very much for coming here and talking to us. I am sure a lot of students who would be hearing this would get a great insight about higher education, both abroad and online. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. It was really nice.